So that's an interesting question. As a voter, right? Okay, as a Kamala Harris voter, how do you feel about the economy? Honestly, like what are your thoughts right now? Because my thoughts right now, I'm doing just fine. It's mainly because I moved out here and I sort of reorganized my life. But when I really look at it, do I own anything right now? No. I basically live in somebody else's house that I rent a room in. Most of the stuff that is in this room is not mine. And it's literally something that somebody else bought with all of their fucking money. So I'm doing okay. I have a job that's sustainable and I'm like making some progress in life, but I'm not like flush with cash. I don't have extra money. I'm definitely living paycheck to paycheck. Tried to save a little bit here and there. Couldn't do it. But like, so things seem to be like working. Like it's not like I'm unable to get a job. I seem to have a steady job right now. But when I really look at like what I should expect to be available to me at this age, it's not there. So I guess, but I don't share this impression of the economy like Biden has ruined the economy. I mean, you do have inflation, which is noticeable. And it may just be the fact that I moved to California that I'm making higher wages than I would have been back in Ohio. So obviously everything's more expensive out here as well. But for me, it kind of balances out. But I mean, back home, how are you feeling about your wage? How are you feeling about the groceries? Like when you sort of look at your life, we all have our problems. We don't have to like get too fucking deep into it. But, in terms of the economy, as people that are left-wing and Kamala voters, do you feel like that's a blind spot of ours? Neither of us are rich. It's not like we're fucking, above the middle class. Like, what are all these people complaining about? We're in that shit. We are working class. So I don't know. What's your impression of the economy?
The economy is bad right now. One benefit, or probably the only benefit of me not really having a lot of money or any property really, is it doesn't affect me that greatly. It affects my 401k a little bit. I'm making a little bit less on that than I would, just because the overall market being bad. But nothing too great affecting me personally. Obviously, inflation's an issue. Groceries are more expensive, etc. Those things do affect me. I'm making okay money right now for me. Not great money, but about $25 an hour, and I work about 50 hours a week. So it's okay. I can live, but just barely. But yeah, the economy's horrible. I would like to see it get better. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of capitalism, but I still have to participate. So, just to survive. But I believe most of that came from Trump's reign of power. I don't think Biden's done much to help the little guy, but Trump certainly did not. And with his strong belief in tariffs and fighting other governments and stuff, and the general public's not understanding of how tariffs work or that it really hurts them, I only see things getting worse. We might see a little bit of a boost right in the beginning that's more from the Biden era, but I don't see anything big really happening to help us with these next 4 years under Trump. I'd love to be wrong about that, but I really doubt it.
Yeah, so what's going to happen with the economy over the course of Trump's term? I guess in probably the first 2 years or so, it's going to get better because of Biden, and Trump's obviously going to take credit for it. But then what? Is Trump just going to tank the fucking economy after that point? That's kind of what I think is the most likely. If you, spin the wheel and pick one of the Republicans' economic policies or any policy, all of it is going to do damage to the economy, including the mass deportations that they want to do. And who knows what other types of unexpected weights on the economy there's going to be. Yeah, I would like to believe that that's what we're going to see. We're going to see, a slimming down of the extra spending and, balancing the budget, but that's just never what Republicans do. They always fuck things up, and that's not really the type of policy that leads to any good things anyway. It seems to appeal to people's frontal lobe, like the idea of balancing the budget, not being in debt, supposedly, you know, bringing down the national debt, as though that ever affects anybody. I mean, maybe you know more about what the economic ramifications of the national debt are than I do, but you know, in my estimation, it doesn't seem to matter. I mean, I get it makes sense to have policy to balance it somewhat, because it doesn't seem to make sense that it would just be something you could balloon completely out of proportion forever. But yeah, I don't know. I just don't. I think Biden was at the beginning of his term on the right track when it came to his economic policy and doing things that actually invested in America. But to an extent, I guess that's the question is, did that lead to inflation, or did COVID naturally lead to inflation via price gouging and everything that has happened since then? What do you think about that? Do you think that, you know, basically policy investing federal dollars into the economy, whether it's sending money out to people or child tax credits, et cetera, is that responsible for inflation, do you think, or is it not? I mean, obviously, I don't think it is, but it's not something that I quite know enough about to speak authoritatively, and it's certainly easy for the Republicans to make the argument that that's the reason that the economy is bad, which is a real fucking shame, because it would be nice to live in a country where people weren't so afraid in public investment, given that is the thing that we're lacking in every area. Education, you know, homelessness and housing, transportation across the country, upward mobility, just inequality in general. All of these things can be solved with a focus on public investment. But every time we get a little bit of that, we get a wave of reactionary policy that strips it all away, gives it back to the rich, and I'm getting real sick of that push-pull of this society of ours.
No, to my understanding, any kind of aid, welfare, those kind of things don't really affect inflation at all, because it's straight coming from the government. What you asked about the national debt, it does infect inflation, but it's pretty broad, and I don't know that it has ever impacted more under Republicans than it did under Democrats stuff. Obviously, if Republicans are adding to the national debt more, it's going to affect inflation more, because companies just have less money to invest back into America. The biggest, within the first 2 years, we might see the economy start to get better as rollover from the Biden administration. I don't know what Biden has done to help the economy that we'll see. There probably is some stuff, but I'm not familiar with all of it or anything. He's been a pretty lame duck president. I haven't seen him do a whole lot of things. Certain things that have caused inflation are things to do. Sweeping tariffs like Trump's proposing, 20 to 60% on general goods coming from China is huge. And that's directly put back on the consumer through either direct cost of items or hidden costs other ways that the company uses to recoup that money that they're paying those taxes on as the buyer of the imported goods. Stuff like the unemployment rate being low actually hurts inflation too, which is kind of crazy to think about. But when the unemployment rate is so low, yet companies are still trying to hire, they have to do things like raise wages and benefits to attract employees. And of course, they don't take that out of their profits. That goes back on to the end cost of goods or services affecting the consumer. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that, in fact, affect inflation, increasing it, obviously. And a lot of Trump's policies, it's funny, one of the things that got him elected was rallying against inflation, but the same stuff he's proposing, the tariffs, like you said, the mass deportation, all those things will increase inflation. Obviously tariffs directly, and the mass deportation, a lot of like what I talked about, employers having to attract new employees with higher wages and benefits. They're definitely going to have to do that, especially with unemployment being as low as it is, if you're deporting millions of Americans, illegal status or not. I guess technically not Americans if they're legally not an American, but you know what I mean. People in America doing work. So I see a lot of this being very, very bad for the economy over the next few years.
So do you think that the economic powers that be will allow for this tariff stuff to go through? I mean, obviously, they've already said that they're going to pass the cost on to the consumer, so they probably will. Like, they probably would rather allow that to happen than to start a fight with Trump over it. But I suppose there's probably very few people that have leverage with Trump, like, you know, the bookkeepers of the economy, especially on the private sector side. You know, those type of people, I imagine for maybe 50 to 60% of them, all they would have to do is call Trump and be like, yeah, tariffs thing, no. But even then, I mean, Trump, if he wants to, if for some reason he has it in his head that he wants to do that, then he'd probably do it anyway. So do you see that being stopped up somehow, or do you think that we're just going to have to bear the brunt of the costs?
I don't think he'll get too much fight from companies on that. Probably some. There'll be some companies that stand up to him on it, I would imagine, but they're not going to have enough power to really do anything. I think for most of them, the trade-off in the tax breaks that they get through him are more than worth it, since, like you said, they've already said they will pass the debt on the consumer side. Read something, the CEO of AutoZone said that in those exact words. So I don't see him getting too much fight on it. I'm not exactly sure why he's caught up on these tariff things. I think because it makes him look like a big man to the other countries, and you can say he's going after China and stuff like that. And he claims that it creates more jobs in the U.S. because companies are forced to buy local and hire more, or build more factories and hire more employees and stuff like that to make the stuff here rather than pay those tariffs. But they don't. They just still do it that way, buying it from foreign providers, and then, like we're talking about, pass the cost on to the consumer. So I don't see him getting too much fight on it. What I do, one thing I didn't mention too is the war in the Ukraine. Russia's invasion of the Ukraine has infected inflation a bunch because that drove gas prices up. The cost of oil went up a lot because of that, and the cost of oil, I mean, gas affects everything. Like, it's not just buying gas, obviously, because companies ship things and, you know, use gas and oil. And so, you know, if it all of a sudden costs a company, you know, a third more to ship something across the United States, those costs then go down to the consumer again. It's always going to work out to where the consumer ends up paying for it, and the companies are just fine. So I don't really see him getting much fight on it, and I don't see it being, because he only has to worry about those 4 years, right? And then he's out. I mean, hopefully. So I think we're going to get a real, like, burn it down and make a big show of his presidency this time around.
It seems like the whole political and economic theory of 2024 Trump, and Elon Musk has essentially said as much. Which, side note, have you heard about how Elon Musk is, like, hopping into calls with foreign leaders and hanging out every day with Trump at Mar-a-Lago? Like, Elon Musk is, like, right. He's essentially an oligarch. Like, he's right there in Trump's ear, which obviously can't last long. I don't think Trump is capable of working with anybody in that capacity for very long. So that'll probably be fun to watch that go down in flames. But, I mean, how fucking crazy is that we just have some asshole billionaire who has no responsibility whatsoever in government just, like, hopping on phone calls with foreign leaders? That's, like, one of the most fucked up things I've ever heard. But anyway, so the whole theory seems to be that there's like a greener pasture on the other side of some of these things, right? So whether it's mass deporting all of these families and people who are doing no wrong from the country, and how ugly and horrible that's going to be, or the idea of these tariffs where it's like, you know, it's going to cause prices to go up and the American consumer is going to have to deal with it. But then on the other side of that, things are going to resettle in a better place because of more American manufacturing or whatever. Or, you know, the economy will be better if we remove all of these immigrants from it, which obviously that's not true at all. But Elon Musk essentially said that it's like, you know, it'll be necessary for Americans to take on some temporary hardship in order to, you know, get to a better place or whatever, which obviously sounds very dark and just sounds like an excuse to, you know, ruin the economy and strip it for parts, which is pretty much what Trump did last time. So I guess, do you think, I mean, we're probably both in agreement that these all of these policies are barbaric and destined to fail, but there is a part of me that's curious about the idea that, you know, doing like something like tariffs where you sort of upend the current order of things, right? Like if I'm Trump and I think, well, I want to imbue tariffs on China because I don't want China to be importing so much stuff, I want to make it here. And yes, that will cause financial hardship and economic turmoil in the short term, but in the long term, it will force things to reorganize around American manufacturing. Maybe that's giving him too much credit on the thought process, him personally for sure, but there has to be somewhere that they're getting this from, right? There has to be some theory behind it, or is the idea to just absolutely fuck everything as much as possible so that the rich can laugh their way to the bank?
So it actually does sound like a good plan on paper, right? You impose these exorbitant taxes on companies for buying foreign goods, and then that causes them to build domestic factories, create jobs, and produce things locally, if that actually happened. But for that to really happen, you'd have to do something like set some kind of rate, like you can only increase the cost of your goods or services by X percentage in Y amount of time, or whatever. But telling a company what they're allowed to charge for a product is very un-American, uncapitalistic. You know, they're not going to do that. So instead, the companies just say, okay, we have to pay these tariffs. We're passing those costs on to the customer. And that's what they've always done. But for the Republicans, it looks good because they can say, hey, we are trying to create domestic jobs. It's these corporate assholes who are screwing you. This is why you don't want big government involved in this and that. And it's like, it never works out that way. The CEOs only care about the short term. That's all they're going to be focused on. And it looks good for the Republicans on paper to like the working class people who aren't really as savvy about this stuff, and maybe have a little more faith in the Republicans to actually be looking out for their best interests. And they're not. It's just going to be the same cycle. This is going to happen. It's going to destroy the economy even further. And in 4 years, things are going to start looking really bad. And maybe the Democrats are going to win again. And all of a sudden, everyone's going to blame after a year in 2029, a year of the new Democratic president, when all this shit is catching up and rolling downhill from 4 years of Trump's unchecked madness. You know, best case scenario, you know, they'll be mad. They'll elect a Democrat in 2028, and after a year in 2029, they'll be like, the economy's shit. You need the Republicans to come save it again. Look at this. The Democrat's only been in the White House for a year, and he's already destroyed the economy. Trump was building up. It's the same cycle. I mean, you would think people would wake up to it and look at it, but it's how like the Democrats and the Republicans always bounce back and forth and do these kinds of things, and we're the ones that hurt at the end of the day, as always.